having me. This session, Beyond Reality, is going to come in about 2 waves. The first is focusing on inside the making of virtual reality with folks from the New York Times and Legend. Why don't you guys come up on stage as well? They are going to talk about the producing Take Flight, which is a fantastic piece. And it was demoed this morning. Did I hear that? Last night. How many of you saw that experience last night? Just a handful. Oh, you missed out. But there are ways to view it. You can download the New York Times VR app. It's in there. And you may have heard of this little app called YouTube. A lot of 360 VR experiences are accessible there, so you don't need an expensive head-mounted display or anything like that. But why don't we start? Why don't you guys introduce yourselves and talk about that project? And I have these little VR portable headsets that you can clip onto your phone. They're branded by USC Annenberg, my school of journalism. If you have a good question and we decide you've asked a good question, we'll give you one of these limited headsets so you can immerse yourself closer to Beyond Reality. How should we start? Who would like to? You want to show it first? Sure. Okay, can we show Take Flight?
And we're going to watch without audio, so feel free to make fun noises.
Without audio and without the virtual reality. So we've unwrapped the 360 and to play a traditional. So this will give you a brief sampling of what it's like.
And I have to always disclose, whenever we demo virtual reality flat on a big screen, it is extremely underwhelming. I will just tell you that. If you watch this experience, even through your mobile phone, through what's called Magic Window, it's extremely compelling. So you have to imagine this world wrapped around you.
And we will be doing demos again following this panel, so come find any of us and we'll be towards the back with the Legend banner back there. And we're happy to give you a true demo if you want the 360 experience.
So perhaps you can describe for those in the back that can't see the details, what.
Well, that's Michael Fassbender, if you can make it out. And on the right is Charlize Theron. And biking way in the back is Lily Tomlin. And who else is up there?
Rooney
That's
Mara.
Rooney Mara and
Yeah.
Melissa McCarthy off in the background there.
Mm-hmm.
When you've got the goggles on, this is all very close
all
to your
around
field
you.
of
It's all
view.
around you.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I think Benicio del Toro is coming up in there. Oh, and that's Jason Mitchell, who's flying in the back. And Jacob Tremblay as our tiny astronaut.
Some shards of glass that kind of float past you and at you.
So perhaps let's
Yeah,
start,
let's
Maureen,
get
introduce
going,
yourself,
yeah.
and
So-
we'll go down and then talk about the goal of the project, how the project came to be.
So I'm Maureen Towey. I'm a senior producer for VR at the New York Times.
I'm Daniel Askill. I'm a film director and I directed Take Flight for the New York Times.
A very humble award-winning director.
Yes, award-winning at the AIS Lumiere Award. So
That was nice that was received that.
yeah. I'm Will Maurer, the Vice President of VR at Legend.
I am Sarah Stiteler. I am the Director of Business Development for VR and Visual Effects at Legend.
So this project started, every year the New York Times Magazine does a Great Performers series where it started as a photo portfolio of actors that were maybe going to get Oscars or had had a breakthrough performance that year. So we worked very closely with film critic A.O. Scott to choose those actors. So it started as a film portfolio about 6 years ago. It started as a photo portfolio, then became a film portfolio, and Take Flight was the first year that we decided to add VR to it. And when this started, poor Daniel, we were like, okay, so your theme is Take Flight, so all of the actors are going to be airborne in some way. We don't have a lot of money to make them airborne, and there's going to be VR, but we don't know what that's going to be yet. So I think part of the way that we start this is we know who our actors are, and then we try to find this range of scenes that'll fit our theme. So we had, like the Salvador Dali famous photo of him like flying in his studio with 2 cats and some canvases midair. So that became who Melissa McCarthy was in her shoot, and Daniel brought a bunch of stuff to the table of like beautiful, what was it, the woman levitating over the bed? I don't remember.
From the Tarkovsky film.
Yeah. So we found all of these images from the history of photo and film, and we used those to inspire the piece. The way I want to, though, frame this for you from my end is that the logistics really informed the creativity in a big way, because with actors of this caliber, we had 2 hours total to do a portrait, a short film, and their contribution to the VR piece. So that was like sort of mind-boggling. And we had only done 1 VR piece before at the time, so it was still really, really new to us. So part of what ended up happening and what came out of this was the portions that we created, the short films. We did sort of a variation on that kind of became this, like a composite of this. I'll let Daniel, we brought Daniel on. We were looking for a director for this, and we love Daniel. Daniel works with Sia and those beautiful videos that I know you all know. And we all loved that. And then when we started digging around in his personal work, we realized that a lot of it was people in midair. And we were like, he's our guy. So I think when you came on...
Yeah, it was so exciting to be approached by you guys at the time. And I was obviously aware of the photo portfolios and the short films that had been made in past years, and it was obviously also exciting. And we think maybe we'll do a VR piece this year as well. And I think to extend from what you were saying, because of that, a lot of the sort of the technical considerations did really inform the creative in a really exciting way. We obviously had this beautiful overarching idea of take flight from that's, everything from a superhero movie to what we were talking about, something more transcendent like a Tarkovsky film. But what really did become quite a complicated challenge was, when you've got 2 hours with Charlize Theron, how do you get a photo that's going to work in the magazine, a short film that's going to play traditionally online, and then somehow get a piece of her that's going to work in a bigger virtual reality experiences, and how those 3 different things are going to have a kind of unified voice, but also add to the conversation of the piece as a whole. So it was a really exciting process, and just to try and talk through it quickly, how that would basically work was we'd have that couple of hours. I kind of used the short film as the entryway in. So for instance, with Charlize, she came in, we had her in a very uncomfortable kind of position, hanging off the edge of a table, not like this, because, we were stretching the budget a long way, and we made a little short film of her floating like that in the darkness, grabbed a picture of her, and then what we do for the VR, which I guess is, VR can be made so many different ways, and this was actually my first experience of doing it, from something that's captured live action through to something that's very much more post-driven. And this sat very much in between that, in that we'd capture a long take of her that could then be looped, that we then handed over to the amazingly talented crew at Legend, and they would then build that into a CGI world that we were designing in tandem. So slowly, as we were capturing Charlize and then Michael and Melissa and slowly all the other actors, we were populating this kind of nocturnal universe of these floating characters. So that was kind of the very basic broad brushstrokes arc of how it came together. And it was a very rewarding experience for me, because virtuality was very new for me at the time too. So I think it just felt like the tip of the iceberg of what can actually be done in that medium.
Yeah, I think the marketing campaign was amazing too, what you did with bringing VR into the mainstream and getting it out to a group of people who at the time wouldn't have necessarily come across VR or tried it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I should say that when VR started at the Times, the first piece that went out, the way that was distributed was there was, I hope I'm getting this number right. Was it a million? There was
Yeah, over a
there was
million,
a
yeah.
million. There was a million Google Cardboard headsets that got mailed out to, you know, the folks that get the Sunday Times. So if you got the Sunday Times, there was one day when you got that Google Cardboard, and so that when our films came out, you could watch them at home in headset. And that was like really a huge push in terms of distribution of VR and the way that people can see it. That for us was a big
Yeah,
deal.
that was such an incredible thing that you guys did, because I think so often people make VR and think, well, how many people are really going to see this? But the fact that everyone got that box with the paper.
So how did Legend get involved in the role that you guys played?
Yeah, so at Legend, you know, we work with a lot of the studios and brands and agencies and museums, and you know, it's really taking the vision for the creative and bringing that to life. One of the questions we always ask our clients are, why VR? Why do something in VR? What is the point? And I think this project is a perfect example of how you can take print, traditional, and VR and have a great creative through line through all three different distribution platforms. VR puts you in someone else's shoes. It's an empathy machine. It takes you places you can't necessarily go in real life. So to be immersed in this world in outer space with all these celebrities that you watch all the time was an amazing concept. So when we got involved, we were on set for the supervision of the VR piece. And we'll take you through a little bit of the movie magic that happens on set, because it was quite a fun, interesting shoot, and to see it all come together into the piece that it evolved into was quite interesting. Thank you.
We can go to the next one. So that started by creating this full CG environment of Hollywood. So there's a few different images of how that kind of evolved.
Was this New York? It was oh, this was Hollywood.
I mean, very quickly, there's kind of an interesting story about even this part, because when we started this process, the VR was kind of, you know, there'd always been the photography and the videos, but the VR aspect was kind of a smaller edition. And we really just had this idea of there was going to be these celebrities floating, and you were going to be up there with them, so you got to get inside it through the VR. And, you know, thanks to the kind of ambition of the New York Times, as we were filming it, they were kind of, we all had this feeling that, like, wouldn't it be great if you could start on the ground, though, and lift up with them and really get that sensation of flight, which is, you know, really what VR is so amazing for, really being there and being inside and having an experience you couldn't have. And so I was actually probably a bit resistant at the time, because we had so much work to do. I was like, look, I think VR, we're just going to be up there with them, okay? But, you know, the New York Times, it's so incredibly ambitious, they were kind of like, no, we can take off. And thanks to Legend, we were like, okay, let's have a shot at this. And so halfway through the process, you guys started building a full 3D city.
Exactly. So this is kind of one of the final shots of that. And then if you continue on, we have a bit more of the magic that happens. So as they kind of, we can stop for a second. You can kind of see the rigs that are involved and things like that when you're on set, and then how we kind of comp that out. The screen's very dark, but you know, Jacob was shot against a black screen there, and you know, we essentially cut him out, take the rigs out, and if you go to the next slide, you can see, you know, that's his final image of what we actually ended up placing in that CG environment. Probably Daniel. I don't know. on the left-hand side.
Sleeping
there.
on the job.
It's kind of a few of the before and afters. Here's
There's
That's
the
poor
table.
Charlie.
If you go back one, there's the Charlize on the table with the green screen markers, and then that gets transformed into that.
to give you that floating effect. Benicio del Toro. We take something that doesn't necessarily look so glamorous within the moment, and then, you know, our job is to make that look beautiful in the final picture. So this is kind of what you end up like. But, in the actual VR experience, you, as Daniel, was mentioning, you start on the ground and you're lifted up and you fly up among the stars with the stars. So it's a really beautiful piece, and we encourage everyone who hasn't already to take a look at it while we're here today in the headset.
And it's always fun to see people grab onto the chair when they're going up, because it always happens. You think you're actually being teleported, and you reach for something.
It's so funny thinking back on it now that it could have ever existed without that lift-off, because it's really become the quintessential moment of that piece, is that moment of flight.
CG is part of modern filmmaking, so I'm assuming the actors were all up for it, or they're like, what is this VR 360 business? Was there any resistance at all?
I think that excited them about it, because it was something new, but
I think a bunch of them, I remember us putting them in headset when they were on set, because none of them had, not all of them had seen it before. So it was sort of like a sell, you know? And some of them were like, yeah, done it, been it,
Cool.
understand, you know, yeah.
So let's open up the questions. If you have questions, feel free to ask. I'm also monitoring Twitter. If you want to tweet with the hashtag, I'll keep an eye on that. But what are some lessons learned for someone starting out that wants to take on a project like this? How do you start, right? Hopefully your boss is open to the idea, but how do you have the culture there in the institution, a budget perhaps, or what tips or lessons learned do you have?
Yeah, well, and I should say, VR at the Times was started by Jake Silverstein, who's the editor-in-chief of the Times Magazine, who is like a very gifted, charismatic leader, who's the type of guy who sort of just like pushes the idea through and then asks for permission as he's going through the door. So that's very helpful. And I should also say, you know, this being the second VR piece that we did at the Times, since then, you know, we've started a project called the Daily 360, where we make a VR piece every day. So that is like a wildly different scale than this. So I think for the organizations that are in the room that are at like different budget levels and different scales, like I should say, like this took us months to make, and that was like cutting it close. Whereas like now there's VR that we make, you know, if we're responding to breaking news, we can make it in 3 or 4 hours. So there's a really wide range, but I think having the leader on board who, you know, getting that person in headset and getting them to understand how exciting it is, that's really a great first step.
As a director, what were the things that were different? Did you have to do anything different?
well, obviously, I mean, the key thing really is that you're suddenly thinking in 360. We get so used to everything, you know, being framed like these dioramas or on a television screen or in a movie cinema. And for me, it was just really fun to be able to think of what's all around you. And a lot of interesting questions come up about how do you tell a story in that space? Is it about telling a story anymore? Is it more about an ambient experience like we have here, where you can look around? Obviously, you can recreate a space like a museum, obviously, and walk through it and experience it. Like, as Maureen says, the sky is kind of the limit in terms of, excuse me, not only the execution, but in terms of how fantastical or how much it can be a documentary of something real and being able to go somewhere that you just wouldn't have access to otherwise. So there's so many different entry points. So I think it's really exciting. That way, that it is only limited by your imagination, really.
Any questions from folks so far? I don't see any hands. So,
Oh, there's one in the back there.
okay, there you go. You guys. What are some reoccurring questions you get with first-time VR content creators? Some advice that you give them?
Yeah, a lot of times, filmmakers or clients come at VR with a traditional mindset, and doing a lot of VR before you actually figure out what you want to do is a good step.
Try
to understand the power. Some things work a lot better in VR, and other things don't work at all. Motion sickness is a big thing in VR if not done properly. So, from camera movements to setups to just what you want the consumer to feel, how that gets distributed is another big piece. Is it interactive? Are you walking around?
Correct.
Are you interacting with objects or scenes or the world? Or are you just sitting back and passively enjoying an experience? So those are all a lot of the steps to take into account.
The question in the back there?
Hi, I'm Lisa Delgin from the Skirball Cultural Center. And you mentioned the viewer being able to tell their own story as opposed to a story that you're kind of dictating to them. And I was wondering if you've gotten feedback from users, like from the photo only to the video to the VR, like how that experience has changed for the user.
Well, I think at the times the hope is that all of these mediums can contribute to storytelling in a different way. I think we've been working really actively to figure out where VR works best and 360 video where that works best for storytelling. So in a lot of our articles now, it'll be like, okay, there's a photo at the top, and then you read a bit, and then you get to see a 360 scene, and then you go a bit further, and then there's like a video, a single scene from a video, and then photo, and then, so really these want to all work together. And I think that's so in addition to being able to watch stuff in headset, you can just embed those 360 videos. And that actually is pretty easy to do because YouTube has pretty good 360 experience. Facebook has pretty decent 360 experience. So there's really ways to fold it in all sorts of ways. But I think our readers really respond to experiential things, which is part of the reason why this worked so well, because it was just like a beautiful, breathless kind of moment. And, and that goes completely in the other direction for the Times. The piece we had done before this was about children who were refugees, and getting to experience that and their world. So, I think it definitely has its place.
Is there another question? The microphone will get to you. There's one over there. How did you distribute this piece, and where did you find most engagement? How do you measure success? I'll be that guy. I'm going to ask that question of all the future panelists, like, yay, it worked, or it kind of worked.
We distribute these in so many different ways. So, at this point, it's like, when we were starting with this piece, it was like in the NYTVR app, and you would watch that in Google Cardboard, but now we're in like the Daydream, we're in Oculus, we do it 360 on YouTube, we do 360 on Facebook. We just distributed a piece, so it's actually it's like 14 different versions of it that we put out in the world so that as many people as possible can see it. And the response is pretty amazing, because people, people love them. And Times readers that are older, I would say, okay, my grandmother's 85, and she's a pretty typical, stalwart Times reader, and she watches these 360s every day and then sends in critiques. Do you know what I mean?
Oh, that's great. What's her harshest one?
What?
What's been her harshest critique?
Well, no, she just doesn't like it if it's stalled. She doesn't understand buffering, so that's a whole other question. But
Well, that is a legit concern.
I think that was actually my favorite moment with this project when I took the headset home, when I went back home to Australia over Christmas and put it on my grandmother's head. And it is so universal, and just watched her have that little trip was, really great. It is a very universal kind of experience, VR.
Yeah, the best is when you put it on somebody for the demo, and then you say, no, you could look everywhere, and
Yes.
then they go, "Whoa," and then they don't stop.
There was a question here? Yep.
Yes, I have a question. The first thing that pops up in my mind is, and probably I'm too practical, but I think budget. Because it all looks amazing, but I'm a museum in the Netherlands, and if I think about our marketing and communications budget, then I have a lot of doubts.
So I warned Maureen that was going to be the question I would direct to her.
yeah, I'm not going to address
So
the budget on
piles
this one.
of money. That wasn't a table. That was a pile of money Charlize was laying on, I assume.
I should say, we were very lucky to work with these guys because we do work with editorial budgets. So, we are a newspaper, so we're not a Hollywood studio. So our budgets are more reasonable than you might think. And I would say, for the Daily 360, we use a consumer camera that's a couple $100.
It's now $100.
It's
the Samsung Gear original one.
and it's you can edit it on Premiere. It's a very simple stitch on it. It is actually quite possible, and that skill set is getting out into the world in terms of being able to stitch and edit. So I think it's possible on a wide variety of scales.
Yeah, you can watch this in Google Cardboard or the high-end head-mounted displays. There's so many different types of cameras that you can produce. One of the things that the New York Times did early on was partner up with studios who would love to partner up with the New York Times and get that distribution, make it mutually beneficial, teaching you guys how to do this stuff, and then amplifying their voice. I noticed that was something that was done with Riot and some other folks producing these experiences. What are you going to say?
I was just going to jump in, and from the service provider, aspect, I mean, we've worked with everyone from the New York Times to, a lot of the studios around town promoting their films, and, the budget range goes from very low to very, very high, $1 million plus, and, I think the sooner that you can get someone like us on board to kind of help talk through your creative, talk through what are your budget limitations, things like that. Some are fortunate to not have those limitations, but we understand that some people do, and we're here to help you tell your story in a way that still gets the message across and the experience across within your budget range. I mean, we can help, cut a few things here and there that might not be budget friendly. Another great part of being a part of this project on set was that we were able to make sure that things were captured correctly, so that it didn't come to us in a mess in post saying, please fix this, and that's where you lose a lot of time and money. So.
A couple things that I always think about when it comes to VR is that it's a community that's really supportive of one another, because we all want this to succeed. This is something where people are exchanging knowledge. I've been mentored by other filmmakers, and now I teach my students VR, and I have a class in about an hour and a half teaching VR stuff. So everyone's invited to come. We're actually demoing some stuff for the LA Tourism Board. So it's really collaborative and open and experimental. And one of the key things there as well is that you have to experiment. No, this is not mainstream yet. But I would say we're not going back. Once you try these experiences, you can't un-experience them. And you have to figure out, how do we lean into this particular next disruption and be proactive opposed to being reactive to it. We need to make sure, as content creators, as storytellers, what this medium can offer before it goes mainstream would be my advice, and what a consultant advised to news organizations, to lean into it, to experiment. Some cameras are really cheap, and you can start experimenting and finding out the limitations of storytelling and budget as well. Okay, so we're going to do a change. You guys, thank you for giving up your...